Okay, so I think we'll get started. So my name is Lauren Stiles. I am the president and founder of Disautonomia International. We're a patient advocacy organization that assists and advocates for people with a whole bunch of different autonomic nervous system disorders. And we're very, very happy to be joined by Dr. David Goldstein, who is a preeminent expert in the field. He's the chief of the autonomic medicine section at the National Institutes of Health in the National Institutes of Neurologic Disorders and Stroke. And he's really, really an expert in all things autonomics. And we're really happy to have him talk on this topic because he has actually published probably one of the few articles even discussing it. And I know that a lot of the patients from the ETS surgical complications support groups we're really excited to hear that he was going to present. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Goldstein. You can type questions into the Q&A.
It says host disabled participant screen share.
Well, that's not good. Hold on one second. Let's see if you can try that again.
That's better. That's
Okay.
much better. Okay, so hi everybody. I'm Dave Goldstein, and if you can see my screen, then we'll get started here. Lauren, can you see the screen?
We can see all your slides, so just pick the one and
Great.
put it into
Okay.
presentation mode. Great. There you go.
All right. This is the list of topics for this talk. Like everybody else in this business, I talk about what I know about, and that's not necessarily what people want to know about or can know about. But eventually we'll deal with these nitty-gritty questions that I think are on people's minds. So why are dysautonomias hard? What is the autonomic nervous system? How is it organized? What are the chemical messengers? This is important for post-ETS kind of issue. What are the chemical messengers of the autonomic nervous system? Where does hyperhidrosis fit in the dysautonomias universe, as I call it? What are the treatments for hyperhidrosis? What are the complications of those treatments, in particular of endoscopic thoracic sympathectomy, that's ETS? What treatments are there for the complications of ETS, and what research is being done for post-ETS kinds of problems? So that's a lot of stuff to go over, and in this short period of time, I'm only going to be just touching on some aspects. Why are dysautonomias hard? First, because they're multidisciplinary. If you go to a cardiologist, they look for a heart rhythm and rate problem. If you go to a neurologist, they look for seizures or Parkinson's disease, and so forth and so on. There's no institution that I'm aware of, that including ours, that focuses on dysautonomias, which are in generally multi-system, multidisciplinary disorders of regulation. Another reason that dysautonomias are hard is because they're complex. Let's see if I can get this out of the way here. Here we go. This is what happens when somebody stands up. All sorts of arrows and abbreviations. Another reason that dysautonomias are complex is because there's a zillion autonomic tests, and only some of them are really relevant to the problem. But and different institutions do different types of tests, and there's many abbreviations and tough to pronounce words like dysautonomias, or as we'll be getting into, catecholamines, which are key chemical messengers of the autonomic nervous system. Another reason that dysautonomias are hard is because they're mind-body disorders. It's not a matter of this is a psychogenic problem, or this is a problem outside the brain. The autonomic nervous system operates exactly at the border of the mind and body. And another reason that dysautonomias are hard is that the supply of clinicians, nation and worldwide, is puny compared to the patient demand, because there's so little training in autonomic medicine. So what is the autonomic nervous system? Well, here's a diagram of the autonomic nervous system, and I think anybody who looks at this diagram would pretty much conclude the same thing, which is that this is impossibly complex. So we'll try to start from something that people generally do know about and build up from there. And I use the analogy of a Tootsie Roll Pop. A Tootsie Roll Pop has this this thick, crusty shell, but the key to a Tootsie Roll Pop is the chewy chocolate center. The central nervous system is organized like a Tootsie Roll Pop. The stick is a rope of nerves called the spinal cord, and the crusty candy shell, well, that's the cortex of the brain. But the key to the Tootsie Roll Pop is the chewy chocolate center, and that's the brain stem. So this is kind of an organization, roughly, of the central nervous system. You've got the cerebral cortex, the brainstem, and importantly, the thoracic and lumbar spinal cord, which is where sympathetic nerves come from. This is a sympathetic chain from a human who at death was plasticized and kind of immortalized. And you can see the sympathetic chain is obviously outside the central nervous system. It's outside the spinal column. And you can identify this sympathetic chain by going along the spinal nerves and then looking for a chain that's or a string of nerve tissue that's going perpendicular to those nerves. So that's what the sympathetic chain looks like. And if you were to have a excision or cauterization or clipping of ganglion, then this would be this is where it would be in the body. So I sort of idealize this, make it simple by thinking of the sympathetic chain as like pearls on a necklace on each side of the spinal column. So it's pretty clear that the sympathetic nerves are not in the central nervous system. Why are there ganglia? I use the analogy of how electricity gets to your house. You have these very thick, high voltage wires that are coming from the distribution center. But then outside your house, at least if it's an old neighborhood like mine, you have a utility pole, and on that utility pole is transformer. And what actually goes to your house are these thin, wispy wires, the low voltage and so forth. And by analogy, the ganglia are like the transformers on the utility pole. They're coming out of the spinal cord. There are thick, myelinated, rapidly conducting preganglionic neurons, but that's not what goes to the target organs. What goes to the target organs are wispy, thin, slow conducting, non-myelinated fibers. These are called postganglionic fibers. How in the body is the autonomic nervous system organized? This is kind of complex, but it's not as complex as that first diagram. And what I want to focus on is the sympathetic cholinergic outflow to sweat glands, which is here. So here's the thoracolumbar spinal cord. Then you have this short myelinated fiber, then the ganglia, and then the thin, slow conducting non-myelinated fiber. And acetylcholine is the chemical messenger that's released both in the ganglia and also at the level of the target organs, such as the sweat glands. The autonomic nervous system has parts. It's not one thing. So when you say I have dysautonomia, that really doesn't have much meaning. The autonomic nervous system, as defined by Langley about a century ago, has three parts. The enteric nervous system, that means nerves that are in the gut. The parasympathetic nervous system, which is a word that Langley invented, and the sympathetic nervous system. In the early 20th century, the American physiologist Walter Cannon added a hormonal part to the autonomic nervous system, adrenaline or epinephrine. I call this the sympathetic adrenergic system. And I think most relevant to the talk today, at about the same time, Sir Henry Dale introduced the idea of a sympathetic cholinergic system. The sympathetic cholinergic system mediates sweating, thermoregulatory sweating, gustatory sweating, such as when you eat hot chili peppers and you sweat on your forehead, and emotional sweating. So there are at least 5 components to the autonomic nervous system, and acetylcholine is the chemical messenger for the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic cholinergic system. So if we go back to this thing, here's the vagus nerve, which is the main parasympathetic nerve in the body. This is sympathetic noradrenergic system. This is sympathetic cholinergic system. And this is a special system, the system that goes to the adrenal medulla where epinephrine comes out. You'll notice that there isn't any synapse in the ganglia. It's just a direct myelinated connection. It kind of fits teleologically with the idea of fight or flight. You need something really rapid. All right, well, with that background in terms of organization and the chemical messengers, we can begin to think about where hyperhidrosis fits in the dysautonomias universe. There are numerous forms of autonomic dysfunction. I break it down in terms of pediatric, adult, and geriatric. There are other ways of doing this. And, in the pediatric age group, there's a lot of genetic load, and there's a lot of developmental problems with the autonomic nervous system. In the adults, basically the apparatus is intact, but it's not being regulated right. And in the geriatric age group, the autonomic nervous system is degenerating. by and large, when we're talking about hyperhidrosis, I think we're talking about adults. This is a functional problem. Functional, not meaning that it's psychiatric. Functional meaning that there's dysregulation of the apparatus that actually develop normally. So here is where the hyperhidrosis comes in. Now, what would cause that? And well, you can see there are multiple places where you could have an abnormality where there's an excessive delivery of acetylcholine to its receptors on sweat glands. And if I had to guess, there's something that is, there's something that's dysregulated about the central autonomic network that's supposed to be regulating core temperature. Unlike dogs, let's say, that pant for regulation of their temperature, unlike rats that use their tails for thermoregulation, human beings are basically naked apes. And the way they regulate their core temperature is by way of evaporative heat loss from the skin. For evaporative heat loss from the skin, you need sweat, and you need to deliver blood to the skin surface. So the sweating, by and large, is mediated by the sympathetic cholinergic system, and the regulation of blood flow to the skin is by and large by the sympathetic noradrenergic system. And together, there can be tremendously effective in terms of maintaining core temperature by evaporative heat loss. And this is why people can survive in a sauna, let's say, that's just so hot that you could fry an egg. So nobody knows what causes hyperhidrosis. My guess is that there's some sort of discombobulation in the parts of the brain that control sympathetic noradrenergic and sympathetic cholinergic outflows, but that's just a guess. Well, what do you do about hyperhidrosis? Well, if it's mediated by acetylcholine at muscarinic receptors, you could treat the hyperhidrosis with locally with an anticholinergic cream, and this can be very effective. There's a anticholinergic that's been around for a long time called glycopyrrolate, and we've tried that in a person who had not only a problem with excessive sweating, but the sweating hurt. It was painful sweating, which is almost a unique situation. Glycopyrrolate applied locally not only alleviated the sweating, but also alleviated the pain. It was really interesting. For glycopyrrolate to work, though, it takes many hours. And so if you were going to apply it, it's not like applying like a steroid cream for poison ivy or something like that. It's you would have to apply it and kind of have some sort of plastic glove and wait several hours for the glycopyrrolate to work. Or you could be treated with a systemic anticholinergic, but then there are quite a few side effects that can be kind of nasty. You could be treated, I suppose, with Botox, which would eliminate the release of acetylcholine. at the level of the sweat glands, or you could try surgical sympathectomy. Now, if we go back a little bit here, if you were to cut ganglia here, you would see there is alleviation of the sweating, but you're also interfering with sympathetic noradrenergic function as well. The two go together. So, what are the principles of management of hyperhidrosis? As for all forms of autonomic dysfunction, the most important treatment is education. You have to know what you're dealing with, what you're not dealing with, what the would look like if there were multiple components of the autonomic nervous system involved, or multiple transmitters, etc. You want to learn what to avoid, what would make things better, which drugs would work, would cause problems, and which drugs would not cause problems, and so forth. After that, there's non-drug treatments. Then drugs are a weak third. And in the case of hyperhidrosis, the last resort would be neurosurgery. Cut the ganglia or clip the sympathetic chain and eliminate or cut down on the release of acetylcholine at the sweat glands. Well, what's the problem with endoscopic thoracic sympathectomies? A lot depends on who you ask, because neurosurgeons don't like to think about complications of what they do, especially complications that take time to develop. And nobody knows what the denominator is. That is to say, of people who have ETS, what proportion of people have complications? We know that there are complications, and the people who have the complications are not happy with them. But what's the denominator? What about the people who sail through the surgery and they're cured, and that's the end of the story? I think one of the more common complications is called compensatory or ectopic hyperhidrosis. And I'm going to guess that there are people on this Zoom call who have this or had it, and it's not a lot of fun. The sweaty palms might be improved, or sweaty scalp might be improved, but now there's increased sweating in parts of the body that weren't involved. This is below the level of the sympathectomy. The back, the abdomen, the crotch, the feet and toes. This is a screenshot that I took of a patient who had compensatory hyperhidrosis after ETS for palmar sweating. Well, another I think important but grossly under-recognized a complication of the thoracic sympathectomy is, since you're also disrupting sympathetic noradrenergic nerves that are supplying the heart, there can be a decrease in the amount of sympathetic nerves in the heart. This is what was found by our group in terms of sympathetic innervation of the heart. And this is with a unilateral sympathectomy, which is not really something that's done commonly for hyperhidrosis, because it's usually a bilateral problem. This is bilateral, and you can see there's kind of an obvious decrease in the signal here in the heart. And this is what you see in pure autonomic failure, which is a rare form of autonomic failure where it's known that there's a substantial loss of norepinephrine or noradrenergic nerves in the heart. So it's not a complete denervation, it's partial. And this is because when you do the ganglion clipping or ganglionectomy, you're not necessarily eliminating all the sympathetic supply to the heart. What would the consequence be of this partial cardiac denervation? Well, I think one of the main things would be shortness of breath with exercise. You can't tolerate exercise. Your heart rate might not go up as much as it's supposed to. The brain depends on input from the heart and other parts of the periphery for deciding whether you're emotional. And if this is if there's a cardiac denervation, then you can get like a weird sort of blunted affect. The sympathetic nerves also supply the pineal gland, and so sleep can be disrupted. These are complications that no one would think about if you're focusing on the effect of the sympathectomy on the sweat glands in the skin. One of the things that was tried early on for this compensatory hyperhidrosis is, well, let's just extend the sympathectomy further down, and then that'll take care of the compensatory hyperhidrosis. And that's what was done in this particular patient. And it's kind of obvious. You can see that the person developed orthostatic hypotension, which was quite severe. Interestingly, the heart rate increased just fine. So this is an example of where one part of the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic noradrenergic system, is screwed up. But the parasympathetic nervous system, which is to a large extent what determines the increase in heart rate withstanding, is fine. There are other examples where sympathetic failure produces orthostatic hypotension, but if you depend on the heart rate response to determine whether the orthostatic hypotension is neurogenic, you'll miss that this really is sympathetic failure, and it's neurogenic orthostatic hypotension because the vagal part is intact. That's above the level of where the sympathectomy was. What treatments are there for complications of ETS? Well, we just went through one of them. Extend the sympathectomy, but I think those days are over. If you've had ganglionectomies, that's tough. There have been attempts to kind of rewire or transplant nervous tissue, and if you look at the literature, of course, only they're mainly going to be reports of success. And again, you don't know what the denominator is. If you've had surgical clipping, well, the clips could be removed, but you have to remember that when you put on those clips, you are causing degeneration of sympathetic nerves distal to those clips. And even if you remove those clips, those nerves, those post ganglionic, non-myelinated, slow conducting nerves, they may not regenerate, or if they do, it may take a long time. Finally, what research is being done for post-ETS? And this is kind of humiliating and embarrassing, because I don't think there's much of any research being done on post-ETS, certainly not in the autonomics world. Just a fact. So I have, some anecdotal results to talk about, but except for the finding of the partial cardiac denervation, there's really a dearth of literature based on research for post ETS. So that's the end of my my talk. I'm going to stop sharing, and hopefully there's some questions.
Yeah, there are some questions, and then also, let me turn my video on. There's some questions, and then also I thought we could have sort of a discussion and encourage our audience members to use the Q&A feature to sort of engage in the discussion, because I actually have some questions for these patients. Your last slide saying, we don't have any ETS sort of complications research going on. I actually think that's something that Disautonomia International could help facilitate in the simpler sense. We're not running big autonomic labs, but as Dr. Goldstein knows, we've done survey-based research on POTS, where we just try to capture the patient experience. And we ask people, how long have you been living with this? What are your symptoms? What treatments have you tried? And I really think it's actually not too hard to do that kind of research.
Yeah,
and I think the best way to do it is actually to ask the ETS surgical complication patient community, what are things that are important to you that you would want to ask a large group of patients about in a survey. So that kind of research doesn't get us the rate of people that have this after the surgery, right? Because you're only asking the people who have the problem. You're not asking all the healthy people that had a surgery and had no big deal. But Dr. Goldstein, I don't know if we can recruit you, and I don't want to do it on a webinar, but we can recruit you to be part of that, because I think, it's simple, just capturing the patient experience and publishing it can maybe encourage other researchers to do more substantive research, So where'd you go? There you are. So let's go through a few of the questions here.
I'm at a hotel, and the Wi-Fi is problematic.
That's right. You're back.
Me. Okay.
Here's one of the questions. Let's see. I'm not sure if we have an answer on this, but I'll ask you. Someone wants to know, what would it take for sympathectomies to be banned in the US, just as ETS was banned in Sweden?
I don't know the politics at all.
Yeah, I think it's pretty unlikely that the surgery would be banned, because it doesn't feel like it when you're hanging out in the ETS support groups, but there are lots of people who get this surgery and benefit from it. So it would seem unlikely that the government.
If you were going to pursue this, you would have to find out what the denominator is.
Yeah.
It turns out that 99% of the people are fine, and 1% have a complication. You're not going to ban the procedure.
Yeah. And there are other reasons sympathectomies are used besides hyperhidrosis. There have been people proposing it for some other medical conditions. So even if there was any kind of regulation on it, it would have to be probably very tailored.
Right. I focused entirely on the hyperhidrosis thing, but there's quite I think, convincing experience with at least left stellate ganglionectomy to treat particular types of heart rhythm problems, and can be very effective. So I think it's not going to happen in the United States. I'd be surprised.
So here's a question. Do people automatically have dysautonomia if they have had ETS surgery?
Yes, by definition, this is an iatrogenic form of autonomic failure.
So just explain what iatrogenic means for people.
It's caused by doctors.
Yeah. So here's the second question. What are your thoughts on reversal given the many success stories coming out of Taiwan?
I can't
Not
comment.
sure.
When I looked at the studies, there were some positive and there were some negative. I'm guessing that if you have an unclipping kind of procedure, that's more hopeful than some graft of sural nerve or something like that. I can't figure out how that would work. You're only put together once, and it's tough to think that some neurosurgeon is going to just take a piece of nerve tissue, sort of ram it in there, and somehow all these wispy, non-myelinated fibers that developed over the course of your fetal development and early postnatal life, somehow they're all going to just magically work.
I would say,
but I'd be kind of skeptical.
Yeah, I look a lot sort of with just fascination with research on spinal cord injury, which has a lot more funding than dysautonomia research and sympathectomy research, to look at what are the different techniques researchers are using to make severed spinal cords work better. So, and there's a lot of advancements happening there. And my hope is
very interesting topic, really is. I don't know how well that applies for the post-ganglionic or sympathetic nerves. But you're right. It takes a long time, but there can be some surprising beneficial effects of spinal cord stimulation below the level of the lesion, at least in people who are quadriplegic from high spinal cord injury. I was at a meeting a few months ago in Louisville, and there were patients there who showed videos of themselves going through this very difficult, complex, and long physical therapy with the spinal cord stimulator being adjusted this way and that way. But at least some of them could start to walk. Amazing.
So it's right now it's not being studied in sort of thinking about the ganglia, but I feel like the concepts that they're learning from that, maybe someday that applies to other parts of the nervous system that we need to regenerate or reconnect or get
possible. I mean, it's the major research question. How does this happen? You can see it does, but how does it happen? The spinal cord is cut. I think that's what was most fascinating about attending this symposium. People are kind of scratching their heads and coming up with very fancy speculations about how it might happen, and it's not just a matter of locomotion. There are autonomic problems. After all, you've cut the sympathetic chain, not chain, but the spinal cord descending pathways. They're cut, and yet with this spinal cord stimulation thing and the intensive physical therapy that is over the course of several months, somehow, when these people are tilted, they're able to release norepinephrine. And the autonomic problems, which can be very severe, also get better. Amazing.
Mm. So I'm going to hop on to another question here. Are there any medical tests that you recommend people who have ETS complications get? Any types of autonomic testing or anything like that that might be helpful to figure out a good treatment plan for them?
I'm not sure. I mean, that PET scanning of the heart is kind of cool, but that's a very fancy technology it's only available at the NIH, and I'm not doing it anymore for this problem for reasons that I want to get into. So what would be the purpose of the testing?
Well, this person was just asking if there's any medical tests, but I added to their question that might help them get an optimized treatment. I mean, so let's say you have the surgery, you have all kinds of awful, worse dysautonomia stuff happening now. You know, what, it's not just a compensatory hyperhidrosis, you know, there's other autonomic stuff that these folks have. So, you know, would standard autonomic test, it's probably very dependent on your individual case, right? Like, depends.
Well, if you let's just say you really do have a partial sympathectomy of the heart, and you do have symptoms where you have exercise intolerance, shortness of breath, and your pulse rate doesn't go up like it should. The receptors for norepinephrine are there on the myocardial cells. They're just fine. It's possible that treatment with a drug that acts on those receptors might increase the force and rate of the heartbeat enough that there's actually an effect in terms of exercise tolerance, let's just say. Just a guess. From the point of view of the sleep, I think melatonin can be very effective. And people who have insomnia as a complication of the ETS, melatonin would be pretty simple to try.
Yeah. Do you think that people who have sort of complex autonomic presentations after this surgery, do you think that they benefit from trying to see someone who's an autonomic specialist, which there aren't many of in the world? Do you think, but like that type of doctor is most likely to understand the lesion is causing a problem, and here's some things we might be able to do to help?
Maybe if I'm not going to go back to it, but if you look at that dysautonomias universe, as many circles as there are, hyperhidrosis and post-ETS are not there. So I think even in autonomic centers, they'd be pretty ignorant of what you would actually do.
Well, hopefully not as dismissive. I think a lot of these patients, just like other dysautonomia patients, if they go to their primary care doctor, they often kind of get poo-pooed and, you know, oh, this is no big deal.
You know, absolutely.
Yeah.
You know, and when you have a blunted affect, or nothing really affects how you feel one way or the other. You can't feel joy or rage or grief or what have you. Who studies that, and what would you do about that? I think, unfortunately, what I said about dysautonomias being mind-body conditions, I think this could be an example. If the brain is not getting the input from the heart about a situation that should be evoking an emotional feeling, the brain may say, well, I don't feel anything.
Mm. So it's more of a statement and a suggestion, but it's pretty cool. So I'm going to read the whole thing.
Mhm.
Dr. Goldstein, will you please check EMG, including repetitive stim and jitter on sympathectomized limb muscles? In rodent studies, muscle autonomic neuropathy leads to atrophy and instability of the neuromuscular junction. Post-sympathectomy patients are perfect to study autonomic muscle neuropathy. This could explain autoimmune sarcopenia syndromes as well as motor power trace instabilities in generated power and possibly muscle irritability. Thanks, from Bree. So I think it's a cool comment. I'm not sure if you have
Yeah, that's
answer to
interesting.
it, but it's neat.
You're removing not only the sympathetic cholinergic innervation of sweat glands, you're removing sympathetic noradrenergic innervation, which goes to a whole variety of types of cells. And it's there could be a consequence there that could be objectively evaluated. I don't think anybody's thought about that.
Yeah, it's a neat idea. So here's a question. Is the compensatory hyperhidrosis that occurs after ETS surgery, does it typically present as like an immediate onset, like a spinal shock type, like a spinal severing type of problem, or is it more of an onset, a gradual post-surgery onset? Do you know what the breakdown
I
is?
have a feeling it was pretty quick, but progressive. But my guess is that if you canvass the attendees at this Zoom call, you'd be able to get a better answer than me. I'm going to guess that compensatory hyperhidrosis is a factor in half of these attendees, and they can tell you when it came on.
Yes, I'm a true believer that patients are really the experts. When we have a total unknown that really no one's studying, the first place to ask is the patients, and then try to evolve it into more detailed research from after you understand the patient experience. So I see some folks
patients are a tremendous scientific resource because they tell you what's wrong. It's up to the researcher to try to figure out how that happens, but they tell you what's wrong.
Yeah. I see some people raising their hands. So if you have a question, just please type it into the Q&A toolbar. And I'm trying to get to as many as we can. We can probably do a few more before the 8 o'clock Eastern time hour. There are physicians, this person is just saying, there are physicians that do specialize in dysautonomia. So if you want to try to see someone who has autonomic expertise, you can go to Dysautonomia International's website, dysautonomiainternational.org/doctors. And we also welcome, I put in the chat earlier, we welcome people with any type of dysautonomia in our online support groups on Facebook. We have support groups in all 50 US states, most Canadian provinces, and 60 other countries. We also have some international sized groups that are everyone. And if you go on those groups, you can ask the local patients, like, who are the good autonomic specialists in this area? And they will tell you even more so than what's on our website. And then also I put a link to, there's an ETS-based, like ETS focused support group. It's not run by Dysautonomia International, but the people who run it are very friendly and knowledgeable. And there's quite a few of you probably came from that group, but if you haven't found it yet, check out in the chat. If you have an ETS surgical complication. I think getting the patient community that has this organized in one place so you can network with each other, and almost certainly if you get enough people in a room, somebody there is a statistician and somebody has a contact in the media and somebody's, uncle is a doctor or something like that. So organize your patient community so that you can do a little more advocacy. So here's a question. Is mestinon useful in these post-ETS patients?
Mestinon is that's kind of an interesting one. Mestinon is a blocker of acetylcholinesterase. Most of the acetylcholine that gets released is rapidly metabolized. So if you have an acetylcholinesterase inhibitor on board, then for a given amount of acetylcholine release, you'll deliver more acetylcholine to its receptors.
Mhm.
Acetylcholine, if you remember my organization slide, is also mediates the ganglionic transmission. So it's a kind of an interesting question. I don't understand why compensatory hyperhidrosis happens. I'm going to guess that there's some sort of a discombobulation in the hypothalamus that caused the hyperhidrosis in the first place. And if the brain can't have the amount of sweating that it wants because of the sympathectomy, it figures out a way around it. And so you have compensatory hyperhidrosis. If that were the case, then Mestinon could make the ectopic or compensatory hyperhidrosis worse.
So I just want to jump in because you mentioned, some people who have hyperhidrosis that leads to them getting these surgeries, they might have been primed for a broader autonomic problem. So we've talked about this with Dr. Brock at Johns Hopkins, who runs the hyperhidrosis clinic at Johns Hopkins. And he's not a bad guy. He's not promoting these surgeries at everyone. I know a lot of the ETS surgical patients that have had complications think that, like every doctor who does these surgeries is awful, but Dr. Brock actually very aggressively tries not to do the surgery and really, really, really only saves it for people who are just in super dire straits and nothing else. He actually does great research trying to find alternative ways to deal with it. But one of the things he's studying right now, that it's actually a study that Dysautonomia International has funded, looking at families of his hyperhidrosis patients, and it turns out a lot of them have relatives with other types of dysautonomia. They have orthostatic intolerance, they have POTS, they have really significant gastroparesis, which is sort of like dysautonomia of the GI tract sometimes. So he started doing genetic research on his hyperhidrosis patients and their families to try to find, is there some kind of genetic thing that makes you more prone to this, this autonomic problem. And so he's got some preliminary findings from our study that we gave him $100,000. So it wasn't a huge study. Seems like a lot of money, but in terms of biomedical research, $100,000 is kind of like not much. So we gave him the seed funding to get the preliminary data, and he found enough genetic evidence to then apply to the National Institutes of Health, and he got a large grant to study do bigger study on the genetic markers and hyperhidrosis and sort of multi-generational dysautonomias. So I know that doesn't help people. Yeah, I know that doesn't help people who have already had the surgery and have bad complications, but maybe this is the kind of thing that when we understand this better, we can guide those patients who have a sort of genetically driven thing. Maybe those are the patients that really shouldn't be getting the surgery because it might make a different part of their autonomic nervous system behave even worse.
I wonder about the people who get sympathectomy for other reasons. Do they have hyperhidrosis? I'm going to guess, compensatory. I'm going to guess no. The people with hyperhidrosis, they're coming. They have something wrong upstairs that's causing that hyperhidrosis. And if you don't have that problem, I'm going to guess that you don't get compensatory hyperhidrosis, but I don't know.
So I just want to clarify for the patients, because I know what you mean when you said that, but I don't want people to misinterpret it. When you said they have something wrong upstairs, you're not suggesting it's mental health, they're all crazy, they're just sweating because they're nervous. That's not what you mean. Like there's actual structural changes.
There are parts of the central autonomic network that keep your core temperature where it's supposed to be. And somehow, I'm going to guess in the hypothalamus, but I really don't know. Somehow, the set point for sweating is at a temperature that's wrong. And but yeah, I'm sorry to be, I don't mean to insult anybody.
I just clarified because I didn't
The
want people to think that.
hypothalamus is upstairs.
So, it's funny too, because a lot of dysautonomia patients, people are sometimes dismissive of them by telling them it's all in your head, right? I'm like, yeah, a neurological disease usually does involve the brain, right? Like, so
Right.
even if you have neuropathy in your toes, it's somehow affecting how your brain works. So it's not really an insult. It's probably true, but it's not. Obviously, it's insulting when the way people are trying to use it sometimes to be dismissive of things.
But
Here's a question.
what the patients complain of, in my experience, is God's truth.
Mm.
And just because you can't figure out an explanation, that doesn't justify dismissing the validity of what the person is complaining about.
Mm-hmm. So here's the last question, because it's 8 o'clock and I gotta let you go home to Mrs. Goldstein at some point. Oh, you said you're out at a hotel, so maybe we keep you
Right.
late.
I'm faculty for a course on autonomics for medical residents, and this is a very intensive course, and I'm missing the case discussions now. This thing goes from 7 a.m. until 9:30 p.m.
Okay, here's the last question then. Do you ever see people using clonidine for hyperhidrosis? And maybe explain to people what clonidine is.
Well, clonidine is a type of a drug called an imidazoline, but it traditionally is viewed as a stimulator of alpha-2 receptors. Alpha-2 receptors in general act as brakes on sympathetic noradrenergic outflow. What this means is that that clonidine decreases release of norepinephrine from sympathetic nerves. I'm going to guess that the problem with hyperhidrosis is a sympathetic cholinergic problem. The clonidine, I believe, can have anticholinergic sorts of side effects. I don't see a strong rationale for clonidine.
Okay. Well, I think that, Dr. Gold, a lot of doctors will pretend they have the answer and kind of make something up to make you, feel good that you got an answer. But Dr. Goldstein's honest. He'll tell us when he doesn't know or when there's just no research. And I think really, I want this session to be sort of an impetus for us to help organize this patient community, because even though, really honestly, Disautonomia International we don't have anything on our website about this, but we connected with these patients and realized like they need an organization, whether it's the ETS community itself creating their own nonprofit or something. But for now, we're happy to sort of, let you kind of hang out amongst our peeps and try to get you guys organized as a patient community, because you need to do that to get the research and to get doctors specializing in this and hopefully protect other people from getting this in the future, in addition to finding some more effective treatments for all of you that already have it. So I am on the Facebook support group that another group of folks run. And any of you who are science-minded people and want to kind of help design like a patient survey, feel free to reach out. I'll probably post on that group tonight and see if anyone else is interested. I have a lot on my plate right now, but I'm sure amongst the several hundred people in that group, someone has a science or research background that could maybe help lead it. So anyways, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Goldstein.
All right.
We'll see you around, and have a good night. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
See you guys.
Bye.